There is a financial structure that allows the wealthiest Americans to write a check to charity for $10 million, claim the full tax deduction immediately, pay zero capital gains tax on the appreciated assets they donated, and then control how every dollar of that $10 million is invested and deployed, potentially for decades, through a fund they effectively manage. The charity never receives the money right away. The money sits in the fund, invested in stocks and bonds, growing tax-free year after year, while the donor decides at their leisure which causes will eventually receive grants. In the meantime, the donor has already received the tax benefit. The IRS has already processed the deduction. The capital gains on the donated securities have already been permanently avoided. And the money continues to compound inside a vehicle that pays no income tax, no capital gains tax, and no estate tax, while the donor retains effective control over its deployment. This structure is called a donor-advised fund. It is not illegal. It is not even controversial in legal terms. It is codified in Sections 4966 and 4967 of the Internal Revenue Code, and it has been growing at an extraordinary rate. According to the National Philanthropic Trust, assets held in donor-advised funds exceeded $229 billion in 2022, a figure that has more than tripled in a decade. The largest DAF sponsors in the country include Fidelity Charitable, which alone held over $54 billion in assets in 2022, Schwab Charitable, Vanguard Charitable, and the charitable arms of major financial institutions. These are not small fringe vehicles. They are mainstream financial products that have been quietly colonized by the ultra-wealthy as a combination tax shelter and perpetual investment fund wearing the clothes of philanthropy. Welcome to the Invisible Ledger. If these stories matter to you, hit subscribe and the bell. This is where we trace the money they told you not to follow. The donor-advised fund has its institutional roots in the 1930s, when community foundations began accepting contributions from donors who wanted to support local charities, but preferred to let the foundation handle grant-making over time. The New York Community Trust, founded in 1924, is generally credited with pioneering the model. The structure remained primarily a tool of community foundations until the 1990s, when Fidelity Investments recognized an extraordinary opportunity. In 1991, Fidelity established Fidelity Charitable Gift Fund, a national donor-advised fund sponsor that would accept contributions of appreciated securities, provide immediate tax deductions, invest the proceeds in Fidelity's own mutual funds, and distribute grants to charities at the donor's recommendation. The combination was brilliant. Fidelity collected management fees on the invested assets. Donors received maximum tax benefits. Charities eventually received grants, and the IRS had no mechanism to require that the grants actually be distributed within any specific time frame. The tax mechanics are the core of why this structure is so powerful for the wealthy. When you contribute appreciated securities, meaning stocks, bonds, or other investments that have increased in value since you purchased them, to a donor-advised fund, two simultaneous tax events occur. First, you receive an immediate charitable deduction equal to the full fair market value of the securities on the date of contribution, up to 60% of your adjusted gross income for cash contributions, and 30% for appreciated property, with a 5-year carry forward for excess deductions. Second, you pay no capital gains tax on the appreciation. If you bought $10 million worth of stock for $1 million, you have an unrealized gain of $9 million. If you sell the stock, you owe capital gains tax on the $9 million gain, potentially $1.8 million at the 20% federal rate, plus the 3.8% net investment income tax. If you contribute the stock to a DAF, you pay no capital gains tax. The full $10 million goes into the fund. You deduct $10 million. The fund reinvests the $10 million tax-free. The contrast with the direct sale and donation is stark. If you sell the stock, pay the tax, and then donate the after-tax proceeds, you donate approximately $8.2 million and deduct $8.2 million. The charity receives $8.2 million. If you contribute the stock directly to the DAF, you deduct $10 million, and the fund eventually grants $10 million. The difference is $1.8 million that stays in the philanthropic system rather than going to the federal government, or alternatively, $1.8 million that stays under the donor's effective control rather than leaving it. Before I go further, this video is just the surface. Inside the Invisible Ledger Vault, you will find the complete DAF setup guide, the comparison between DAFs and private foundations, the appreciated securities contribution checklist, the grant-making strategy guide, and the political and legislative history of every attempt to require minimum distribution rates from donor-advised funds. The link is in the description. But stay right here. The investment dimension of the donor-advised fund is where the wealth accumulation function becomes most visible. Once assets are contributed, they are invested according to investment options offered by the DAF sponsor. Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, and Vanguard Charitable all offer diversified investment pools similar to mutual funds. The assets grow tax-free inside the fund. There is no capital gains tax on appreciation within the fund, no dividend tax, no income tax. The fund is a tax-exempt entity under Section 501(c)(3), and all investment activity within it is tax-exempt. Over a decade of tax-free compounding, the difference between a taxable account and a donor-advised fund can be extraordinary. The control dimension is equally important. While donors technically surrender legal ownership of assets contributed to a DAF, they retain what the industry calls advisory privileges, the ability to recommend which charities receive grants, how the assets are invested within the available options, and when grants are made. In practice, DAF sponsors follow donor recommendations almost without exception. A 2020 study by the Institute for Policy Studies found that DAF sponsors approved over 99% of donor grant recommendations. The word advisory is technically accurate but practically misleading. The donor controls where the money goes. Here is the structural tension that critics have identified for years. Unlike private foundations, which are required under Section 4942 of the Internal Revenue Code to distribute a minimum of 5% of their assets annually for charitable purposes, donor-advised funds have no minimum distribution requirement. An individual can contribute $10 million to a DAF, claim the full deduction in the year of contribution, and never make a single grant. The assets can sit in the fund indefinitely, growing tax-free, with grants deferred for years or even decades. The IRS gets no tax. The charity gets nothing. But the donor has already received the full benefit. The National Philanthropic Trust's 2022 data showed that donor-advised funds held over $229 billion in assets and distributed approximately $45.7 billion in grants that year. The payout rate was approximately 20%. Significantly higher than private foundations, suggesting that the average DAF is more active than critics claim. But the aggregate figure masks significant variation. Many large donors use DAFs as long-term accumulation vehicles, while smaller donors distribute more actively. If you have made it this far, you already understand the donor-advised fund at a level that most financial journalists never reach when they write about charitable giving. Subscribe and share this video. Now let me give you the practical application. The donor-advised fund is not exclusively a billionaire tool. Even at modest wealth levels, it offers meaningful advantages. Step 1. If you itemize deductions and plan to make charitable contributions, consider whether bunching contributions into a DAF makes sense. Instead of donating $5,000 per year for 5 years, contribute $25,000 in a single year to a DAF, take the full deduction in that year, and then distribute $5,000 per year in grants over the following years. This strategy allows you to exceed the standard deduction in the contribution year and capture the full itemized deduction benefit. Step 2. If you own appreciated securities, contribute them directly to a DAF rather than selling and donating cash. The avoidance of capital gains tax on the contribution can significantly increase the effective value of your donation. Step 3. Choose a DAF sponsor that matches your goals. For low-cost administration and broad investment options, Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, and Vanguard Charitable charge low administrative fees of approximately 60 basis points or less. For more personalized service and impact investing options, community foundations and specialized sponsors may be more appropriate. Step 4. Open the account online. Fidelity, Charitable, and Schwab. Charitable both allow accounts to be opened online with a minimum contribution of typically $5,000. The process is similar to opening a brokerage account. Step 5. Contribute appreciated securities by transferring them in kind to the DAF account rather than selling them first. Instruct your brokerage to transfer the specific lots with the largest unrealized gains. Step 6. Make grant recommendations from your DAF to any IRS qualified public charity. Grants can be made online and are processed within days to weeks. I need to be honest with you. The donor-advised fund has real limitations and legitimate criticisms. First, once assets are contributed to a DAF, they legally belong to the sponsoring organization, not to you. If the sponsor goes bankrupt or changes its grant-making policies, your assets could be at risk, though this has never happened with the major national sponsors. Second, there is no legal obligation to ever make a grant. The tax system's failure to require minimum distributions from DAFs is a genuine policy gap that critics across the political spectrum have identified. Third, the investment options within a DAF are limited to what the sponsor offers. Unlike a private foundation, you cannot invest in a specific private company, real estate, or other non-standard assets within a standard DAF. Fourth, the advisory privilege does not extend to recommending grants to individuals, foreign charities that are not pre-approved, or organizations that are not IRS qualified public charities. Fifth, DAFs can be scrutinized for self-dealing if grants are used to benefit the donor personally, such as paying for admission to charity events that the donor attends. The IRS rules on prohibited benefits apply. Your grandparents understood charity as a personal act. You helped your neighbor because your neighbor needed help, and because community was the safety net. For centuries, wealth that was given away was simply given away. It did not return to the giver in the form of a tax deduction, an investment account, and a control mechanism. Then, one generation built a system where generosity and tax strategy became the same transaction, where the wealthiest families could be simultaneously the most charitable and the most tax efficient, keeping control of the money long after the deduction was claimed. There was not a more generous system. There was just a more sophisticated one, where the gift could be taken back through a grant made to a cause you approve of, in a year you choose, in an amount that suits your tax position. Subscribe and share this video. Every share names a structure that generated $229 billion in assets, while most Americans thought it was simply a charitable account. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside will pull back one more layer of the financial architecture they built in plain sight and counted on you never to examine.